Bienvenue à tous au webinaire pour ALÉBIO 2021 pour le lancement de la saison. Aujourd'hui, on va parler de comment faire les évaluations de rutabaga et de Radicchio et aussi faire la démonstration de la plateforme en ligne SeedLinked. Les personnes qui présentent aujourd'hui sont Solveig Hanson et moi, Helen Jensen. Et aussi, on a un invité spécial qui est Chris Thoreau qui va faire une démonstration de SeedLinked de la version application. Moi, je suis la gestionnaire du programme pour l'initiative PARTA sur la sécurité des semences au Canada, en particulier des programmes de recherche. So today our presenters are Solveig Hanson and myself, Helen Jensen. I'm the Research Program Manager for the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. We also have a guest presenter, Chris Thoreau, who will be doing an app demonstration of the SeedLinked platform. Next slide. Alors, une note sur l'accessibilité en français de ce webinaire. Alors, on a un diaporama qui est bilingue pour la majeure partie, à l'exception de quelques tableaux. La langue de la présentation, ça va être en anglais. Par contre, dans le clavardage, ça peut se faire de manière bilingue. Et pour les questions à voix haute, vous pouvez les poser en anglais ou en français, selon votre confort, puis on va répondre dans la langue de votre choix. A note on French accessibility for this webinar. The slides are bilingual for the most part, other than a few tables and graphs. The spoken language of the presenters is going to be in English. However, for the chat, you can chat in either language and we'll answer in that language. And same thing for the questions. You can ask a question in either French or English, and we'll answer in the language of your choice and facilitate translation for the other participants. Next slide. So well, I'm Helen Jensen. As I said, I work at Feed Change, managing the research program. And my co-presenter today is Solveig Hanson, who I will pass this presentation over to at this time to introduce herself and continue.
Hi, everybody. I'm Solveig Hanson, and I started in this role as the CANOVI project manager in January after finishing my doctorate in plant breeding and plant genetics at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. I'm really grateful to be working with you all this season. I also want to acknowledge that I am living, raising crops, and doing research on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. The terrible discovery last week at Kamloops Residential School has viscerally emphasized that acknowledgements like this are only first steps. For those of us who benefit from settler colonialism, it's our place to move forward out of grief and shame into self-education, self-reflection, and accountability, and to hold one another in a courageous community as we do that. I'm very grateful to be doing that work as well as this crop work with you all.
Thank you, Solveig. The webinar plan for today is the welcome and introductions section. After that, we're going to go into the broader research questions behind this work to really try to flesh out why we're doing this and how everyone can benefit from it as fully as possible. Then we'll go into the nitty-gritty of planting your trials and evaluating them, followed by an interactive demonstration of the SeedLinked platform, which is the platform that's used for actually collecting and compiling the data from all the participants in the trials, followed by a short demonstration of how to do the same thing with the app version on a smartphone. And then we're opening it up to questions and discussion and any clarifications that need to happen. The trial crops for 2021, there are actually 4 crops that are associated with the CANOVI trials this year. There's Radicchio, which is being trialed in all the regions of Canada or of our trial network. Rutabaga, which is also taking place across Canada. And there are 2 trials that are more regionalized. There's an African eggplant trial, which is a group that has been formed in Quebec to trial specific traditional African varieties of eggplant. And there is also a site for this trial at Farm Folk City Folk in British Columbia, which will provide a contrasting environment for this trial. And there's also winter spinach trial, which is happening in collaboration with the CETAB Plus Research and Extension Center in Quebec. And this is really for people looking to grow spinach well into the winter using tunnels or greenhouses. And we've invited participants from these trials as well to join us today, partly as a way to join this broader network and also for the practical guidelines on how to use the SeedLinked software.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of planting and evaluation, we're going to take a moment to back up and get a broader view of why we're doing this. So broadly, we're building knowledge of crop varieties that are on the market so that you can change varieties more quickly should you need to, either because of climate change, change in your customers' preferences, or a seed shortage of a preferred variety. And these variety trials can also help us identify spaces where plant breeding or seed production could be helpful to Canadian seed security. We're also building a network of relationships among farmers and between farmers and researchers and resource people like those with the Bauta Initiative and the regional partner organizations. And we're doing this all with the hope or the vision that building knowledge and relationships can lead to increased resiliency for the Canadian organic farm sector. So while I was getting my doctorate at the University of Wisconsin, I did a minor in life science communication, which could pretty much be summed up with the idea that trust is a prerequisite to knowledge transfer. Without trust, ideas don't translate between people. So if we get any knowledge from these trials beyond what we see on our own farms and our own fields, which is valuable in and of itself, it's because we have trust in other farmers' observations of RCs, regional coordinators, or a trust in researchers' analysis of aggregated data from everybody's observations. And trust, in turn, according to the field of communications, which I think is also pretty intuitive, depends on three elements: concern and care, openness and honesty, and competency. Next slide, please. So as one of the researchers in the group who's looking at aggregated data, I'm interested in the connections between the way we gather data and the way we present data and the way, or the degree to which you trust it and the degree to which, or the way in which you use it. For David, you can advance one and it'll give us a little animation. There we go. Oh, there you go. So today we're going to focus on how we gather data. This year, as in past years, you'll be asked to rate these varieties on a scale of 1 to 5 for various traits that are of interest in organic agricultural systems. In past years, we've relied on kind of intuitive ratings from 1 is bad to 5 is great. And in a moment, I'll show you some results from some of those trials. And so we're curious, though, about your experience doing rating like that. What's your degree of comfort and confidence in your own ability to rate on an intuitive basis? What's your degree of comfort and confidence in the way other people rate using that scale? And how does that impact the way you use the trial ratings? You can advance one slide. So I looked at the rutabaga trial data from last year. This is too small for you to see. It's just an illustration. Don't try to read the labels. The colored graph on the left-hand side is from Tableau, and that shows numerical differences in vigor, the vigor of the rutabaga varieties that we trialed. And it's visually accessible. It's pretty interactive. You can adjust it by your hardiness zone or your province, and that gives you some valuable information in terms of like what variety you might want to try if you're looking for a new one on your farm. When I did statistical analysis on this same data, which is the grayscale graph on the right, I was able to see significant differences between 3 varieties. So York had much less vigor or significantly less vigor than I think Eleanor and Alta Sweet were the ones that came out on top. And so what that tells us, it's just a measure of like how probable it is that this situation occurred by chance. And there's like less than a 95%, or there's less than a 5% chance that this situation just happened because of random numbers people typed into their keypads. This is an indication that there's really a difference between these varieties that was observed across Canada. When I made that grayscale graph, I controlled for the variability among participants. So like if you use the whole scale or if you use just a part of the scale. And when I did that, these significant differences came out, they appeared. When I didn't do that, and I just used all the raw numbers, there were still differences in the height of the bars, but there were no significant differences. So that's a clue that by controlling for the variability of the data, we might be able to pull more meaningful information out of the ratings we're getting. There's a loud piece of equipment happening outside my window. Can you hear that? Is that bothering you? Can't hear that? Should I go? Let me just close my window really quick. I apologize. Take a sip of coffee. Ay. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so that's one clue that it could be that the variability in our trial data could be obscuring results that we could otherwise see. So go to the next slide, please. I looked at one other statistic called inter-rater or intra-class correlation, and it basically means how many times do different people give the exact same score to the same thing. It's normally used in cases where people are evaluating actually the same thing. So the same piece of writing, the same sample, the same object. In this case, there are a couple of reasons your ratings might be different. One is that things just look different. Like there are these two pictures of rutabaga here. You could just be seeing very different things on different farms in the same variety because of the different environmental conditions. So that's important to know in a trial situation, but it's important to be able to differentiate that from just people using the scale, the rating scale differently. So those two things were our impetus to go to the next slide, please, to try this evaluation rubric. So we gave you in your protocols this year an evaluation rubric for both Radicchio and rutabaga, which kind of spells out, again, don't try to read this, it's too small, read the one in your protocol, just ideas of what a 1 means, a 3 means, a 5 means, so that it could, we're curious whether it will reduce the spread of the data and help us pick out more significant differences between varieties. We're interested in your experience using it. Like, is it a pain and kind of unnecessary, and intuition actually is fine? That's one thing we could learn. Or we could also learn that it does help you feel more confident in your own ratings and those of other people participating in the trial. So that is the background for some of the changes we're making with evaluation this year. And we'll move on to Helen describing, or I guess we could take questions on that part now, if anybody has anything they're wondering about. Otherwise, move on to rutabaga. And you can feel free to use the chat or just unmute and speak if you would like. Hearing nothing, we should talk rutabaga.
All right, thanks, Solveig. This is our second year of growing rutabaga in the CANOVI variety trials. The reason it was chosen was it was brought up as an option by a grower who thought that there was probably room down the line to do some breeding to make the germplasm a bit better. And there are also a lot of other reasons why it's an interesting crop to trial here. One is that it's a good winter storage crop. So, you know, a food security, like food autonomy or food sovereignty crop. It's also a lot of the breeding on rutabaga has been done in the past in Quebec, even though these programs, or not in Quebec, but in Canada, even though these programs aren't very active currently. It is historically a crop that has a history here and in North America. And but this year we have a set of 5 core varieties, which were derived mainly from varieties that performed relatively well in the trials last year, and we thought were very much worth repeating again. So that's these top 5 varieties: Alta Sweet, Eleanor, Joan, Laurentian, and Nadmorska. And then we have an additional like 5 varieties that are either they're new this year or that are a repeat from last year, but maybe didn't perform so well that we thought it was essential for everyone to retry them. And so these are the ones that are in darker yellow at the bottom. So you'll all have received at least that core set of 5, and then whichever ones you chose on top of that when you signed up, you'll have received as well. So you'll plant these according to how you would normally grow rutabaga. We've provided some guidelines in your protocol, but again, like if the guidelines contradict with how you know how to grow this crop well, like please grow it the way you know how to grow it. It's okay to either direct seed or transplant it, just based again on your preference. This won't really affect how you evaluate it because most of the evaluation happens closer to harvest time, and it really doesn't matter how it got put in the ground. We're asking that you plant 12 row feet per variety. And the recommendation is generally 4 to 6 plants per foot, though you may want to seed a bit more densely and thin it down to that. And approximately 12 inches between rows is what most growing guides seem to converge on. Next slide, please. And this year, so as Solveig was pointing out, like we are trying to clarify a bit how to do evaluations to really give you more guidance on how to rate different things. And we've also tweaked some of the traits we're looking at this year to try to, again, make it a bit more clear to you, like what it is you are evaluating rather than having one like very broad trait that many people could interpret in many different ways. Based on our survey of participants in 2020, the traits people were most interested in really focusing in on for rutabaga were disease resistance, insect resistance, heat tolerance, cold tolerance, flavor, and texture. I mean, this is not necessarily this is like, these are the people who wrote comments and specifically said these things. So this isn't a like statistically like sound, you know, evaluation of what everyone thought, but these are just some of the indications we had. So they're not the only traits you'll be evaluating, but these ones we wanted to focus in on if we could. Next slide, please. And so like based on what the feedback we got, but also based on concern we had around some traits being too general, these are some of the changes we've made. So in SeedLinked, there's a trait called disease resistance. And last year, we just left that very broad as just a general, does your plant look diseased or not? And we feel that that's not very helpful when you come to interpret the results because you really don't know like what disease in particular someone might be seeing on their rutabaga plant on another farm that you haven't visited. So we've decided to, in this case, to say that disease resistance in this trial refers only to the Brassica clubroot pathogen. And I'll get into that more in detail on a further slide so that we won't be looking at all diseases, but at least you'll know when someone rates it for a disease, you'll know which one they're talking about. Same thing for insect resistance. We're narrowing it down to cabbage root maggot resistance only. We're going to be looking at both yield and marketable yield. So like overall, you know, how much yield did you get and how much of that can you actually sell versus how much of it you just have to discard because it's damaged or it's not appealing. Last year, we asked you to do a separate trial for storage. So to actually store your crop for a certain amount of time and then take it out of storage and see its quality, see its flavor. We felt that that was asking a lot from people to just kind of continue the trial process well into the winter. And we didn't want to do that. So this year we're going to do like a more controlled storage trial at UBC, hopefully at least one other site. And we'll then share that data, like process that data and share it with you. And we think that will be probably just as useful. And it'll just be a lot less work for everyone collectively. But you are still very much welcome to do your own storage trial for your own purposes, and even encouraged, like if you want to see how they store in your conditions, but we're not asking you to actually submit or share data or to follow any specific protocols for this. And as I said before, you do want to just grow it according to your normal practices, including whether you direct seed it or transplant it. Next slide. So a few of the traits I wanted to focus in on a bit. So the disease trait, referring to Brassica clubroot, which is caused by a soil pathogen, which lives in the soil as spores, and the spores can stay there for 7 to 8 years. So it tends to become an endemic problem unless you have a very, very long rotation and the amount of space to do that. The spores will infect the rutabaga via the root hairs or via any wounds in the root, and they'll cause these swellings, which you can see in this photo here. Like these are fairly like immature rutabagas, but you can see these sort of circles or wart-like structures on the roots. And so what makes this a good disease to evaluate is it's very recognizable. Like I think that we can all be confident that everyone can recognize those swellings and distinguish them from a different disease. So really just focus in on those when you do the evaluation. Here I'm showing you just what the evaluation for that disease looks like in the rutabaga evaluation rubric, which you all have. And basically like a poor rating or 1 is if the damage is just so bad that you pretty much can't harvest anything. And then you go through gradations of that. And what's really important is that the rating of 5 or outstanding, I want you to say that save that rating only if you actually don't see the disease like at all. Not like if you see even a tiny bit, like you need to knock it down to a 4. And the reason for that is that if like in your site, you give a rating of 5 to everything of like no visible signs of disease, when we process the data, we're probably going to consider that you just don't have that disease. And that like you actually weren't really able to evaluate for resistance so much as you were able to just take note of the fact that you don't have any in your soil, which is great. And it will sort of take out that signal of resistance versus non-disease. Next slide. And the other trait I want to go into in more detail as far as pests and pathogens is the insect pest we're looking at, which is the cabbage maggot. And this is a fly whose larval stage lives in the soil and feeds on the roots. And it makes these fairly distinctive tunnel-like patterns in the roots. So again, it's a good trait to have a lot of people evaluate because it's very easily recognizable. You're not likely to mistake it for something else. I think that should increase the confidence in this rating. I'm sorry for the background noise. That's a pet walking around, but hopefully he will move on soon. And if this fly will lay its eggs, they'll hatch in the soil and cause damage. This can be prevented by using nets. If using nets is your normal practice, I'd encourage you to do this. And if you don't have any damage on account of using nets, that's fine. Just make sure you give the rating of like no visible signs of insect damage, and we'll probably just assume you didn't actually have any pest pressure in this case. So yeah, that kind of covers the like pest, the pathogen and insect ratings, like how to consider those. And again, like we really hope this helps extrapolate the results widely. Also, this disease and this pest, they occur across Canada, like they're very common, so they should be relevant to everyone in this trial, like the results of this. And in the case of the Brassica clubroot, like there has been breeding, like there really should be some differences between variety because some have had some breeding work done on them to increase their resistance. Next slide, please. So another trait people were interested in was winter hardiness. For this trait, I mean, rutabaga in general, like does hold up quite well to cold. It's recognized for that. But if the leaves get too damaged early on, it will limit its availability to continue developing in the cold weather. So we've decided that for this trait, we should really just focus mostly on the leaves. And the guideline question is, how well do the leaves of this variety hold up to cold temperatures? And then the very poorest rating possible is just the leaves don't survive. And the very best rating possible is all leaves have good quality after cold temperatures and freezing. And then with some gradation in between them that I'll let you look at on your rubrics. Next slide, please. Another trait that came up of interest was flavor. This is a really complicated trait to look at. Those of you who tried rutabaga last year, like I know just from discussions with people, like it's quite remarkable like how much variation there is in the different flavors for rutabaga. There's bitterness, there's sweetness, there's earthiness. There's a whole complexity of flavor happening in there. And same thing for texture, like some are very creamy, some are a bit more fibrous. We're not like, with this level of evaluation, we're really not going to be able to get into like all those very intriguing and fascinating details. We've tried to keep it fairly simple for flavor, which is that we suggest you, or we ask that you taste them cooked. Leave it up to you to some extent if you wanted to have, like you could steam them, like cut them up into small cubes and steam them, or you could cut them up, you know, put a small amount of a neutral tasting oil on them and roast them. And we're really going just for kind of just broad preference here, like a poor rating would just be like, I would not eat this again overall. And outstanding is like, you would really like seek it out and rave about it. You would just be very excited about that flavor. And we're going to just leave it at that for flavor and hope that just gives us a broad idea of how tasty and palatable varieties are. We haven't included texture in this evaluation because we think it will somewhat like cluster with flavor, and also just practically speaking, I don't think that's an option in SeedLinked for traits. And what we are planning to do over the summer is put together guidelines for like more detailed tasting events where we could work with people to actually flesh out better descriptions of the flavor of these varieties, and that these protocols could be available to people, to organizations, groups, like all of you, in case you want to actually get together with people and do some type of tasting event, whether you do it, you know, in person or set it up in some more virtual way. Basically, we're going to work on it, but we're going to try and get like a sort of bonus flavor evaluation that happens, but it won't be happening in SeedLinked and as part of this, like, you know, very baseline data collection. Next slide, please.
So Helen, just a quick question here. Can you give some guidelines on cold temperature?
On cold temperature, I guess that can vary by region. Like, I imagine that in BC, which I'm not as familiar with, but in the lower mainland where you are, you might not have frosts until very late. I'm generally considering it's like after like at least one frost event. But this might be one of those traits where you do need to adjust it a bit based on what is like a, you know, a cold temperature for you.
Okay, and then one other quick question. Xavier was asking a little bit here about recording yield in actual weight. And I know that's something we haven't done in these trials in the past. Do you want to comment on that? Because growers can do that and put it in their comments, but do you want to comment on what that might look like or your thoughts on that?
I mean, we're not asking you to do that, and you're welcome to, but I can't promise we'll be able to use the data because we're not asking everyone to do it. I would say, like, definitely do it if it helps you in your evaluation of the crop on your site. And also you can do it, like, it may help you with the rubric. So if we go, can we go back to, actually, I don't think we have, no, we don't have the yield rubric on here, but the yield rubric basically for marketable yield, it says, like, you know, say 75% is saleable, or, you know, less than a certain amount is saleable. It goes by percentages. So if weighing it helps you to ascertain that percentage, then I would say go for it. If you're more comfortable just kind of separating it out and visually assessing, okay, this is, like, you know, more than 80% is marketable, 20% is not, then I'd say do that. So I'd say do the weighing if it's useful to you, but you don't need to do it for us. Just try to follow the rubric in the best way you can, whether that's visually or by using actual weight. So we could take a pause. So those are the questions so far. If there's any more questions on rutabaga, we can do those now. And otherwise we can move on to Solveig for the Radicchio evaluations.
All right, Radicchio. So Radicchio is the leaf type of Chicory intybus, which is the chicory species that also includes whitleaf chicory, which is Belgian endive, sugarloaf chicory, which is pomme de sucre in my non-French accent, puntarella chicory, and root chicory, which is the kind that's ground for either a coffee substitute or for inulin. So you all, before I got here, chose Radicchio for these trials for a few reasons. It presents an opportunity for diversification, both in your field and at market, especially in the early and late season for people who are doing season extension or who live in a climate like where I do right now in Vancouver area. Represents an alternative to brassicas, which is important in places where soil-borne diseases like the clubroot pathogen necessitate longer rotations between brassica crops or make producing them difficult altogether. Radicchio is beautiful and incredibly diverse and just interesting in that respect. And from a plant breeding perspective, it's a really cool illustration of regional differentiation based on selection by different people in, like, very close but different places. So the original Radicchio was this Rosso di Treviso Tardivo up on the upper right side. And that was started to be developed in, they think, the mid 1500s. And then over the next couple of hundred years, the Treviso Precoce and Verona types were gradually selected into these, like, different shapes, different width of the rib. And then after that, in probably the last 150 years or so, the lower types, the Veneto, Castelfranco, Chioggia, Lucia, have been developed for these very distinctive shapes and colors and flavors. Within each of these crop types, there are cultivars bred for early maturity, mid-season maturity, and late maturity. And growing any of these in Canadian latitudes and climates is relatively new. So that's one reason that variety trials make a lot of sense for this crop, because we just need to try things and see what works well for this area, and share that information among everybody. I will in your protocol, there's a link to the Chicory Week Radicchio Gallery, which is a initiative of Oregon State University and a few other partners. They have a really extensive, very information-rich Radicchio library. I think they call it a Radicchio Gallery, where you can learn all sorts of stuff about these different types of Radicchio. Next slide, please. We organized these into sets based on their market class and days to maturity, so that they'd be easier to compare within type and easier just to manage within your farming system. Not surprisingly, there's the most interest for the early types, which makes sense with the short length of a lot of people's growing seasons. Also, a lot of interest in the late pink and variegated types, because I mean the pink ones are just so beautiful. Those can be grown either through the winter in mild climates like here in BC, or using high tunnels or other protected culture in other places. Next slide. So the recommended time for sowing Radicchio is sow in the greenhouse in mid-June, like around the summer solstice, and to transplant out roughly a month later. It is important not to rush this. The young plants are cold sensitive, and if they get chilly, they are more prone to bolt, like this photo on the right here. So it's good to resist planting too early, even though there are plenty of crops that can tolerate cold temperatures. So good to wait. Using planting dates like this, the early maturing varieties should be ready in September and October. The mid-season varieties in like October, November. The later varieties into January and February, or even in the spring, depending on how you choose to do the overwinter harvest. We're asking that you plant 16 plants per plot, 1 plot per variety, at about a 12-inch spacing. Let's see, I guess let's move on to the next slide for more details on that. Yeah. So like with the rutabaga, we're asking that you grow using your normal methods, normal bed width, bed spacing, the way that works with your equipment, your normal methods, to lay the trial out in a way that might be most efficient for you and most easy to take care of. It might be good to consider maturity time with respect to the other crops around it, so that so you don't have the one thing hanging out in the middle of the field when everything else has been harvested and the field's ready to be worked. And within some of the sets, there are different market classes included, so you might choose to plant the ones with the light classes next to one another, so you have an easier comparison, although they wouldn't be that spread out no matter what, because the sets are pretty small. It is important for trial purposes, since you only have a small number of each of these, to try to make the conditions as equal as possible among the varieties. So if you can, avoid field edges. So planting a buffer, which can just be your normal crops that you're going to send to market, is a good idea. It's really important to keep track of what's what. So we sent you stakes with all the trial seed. It's great to label them, and also to be aware that labels, especially like in Sharpie marker, can wash off. So if the stakes last all season, it's good to relabel them mid-season if they need to be, because stakes can break or be lost. It's great to make a map also when you plant things out, to keep track of what's where. Or a really easy way to do it is just to take pictures, ideally where you can read the stakes, just so you remember what order things are in when you go back to evaluate. Next slide. So in general, when we ask you to evaluate any of these crops, rutabaga or radicchio, it's good to first go to your trial and take a look at all of the varieties, so you get a sense of what kind of range you're working with. rate on the 1 to 5 scale. And if you do see variation, use as much of the scale as you feel is appropriate. If you do see, like Helen was saying, if you really have no disease, or if everything looks fantastic on for a certain attribute, you can rate it that way. Don't be afraid to use the low numbers. I come from the Midwest in the US, where people like to be kind. So it feels like, you know, you're not being fair by rating something a 2, when really it is a little below average. So it's really important that we know that. Trust your judgment. And if the rubric is useful for clarification, please use it, because we're really curious the effect it has on our trial ratings. So you can advance one and we'll get an animation. There we go. So for bolting resistance with Radicchio, the main question we're coming down to is, does the variety resist bolting long enough for you to harvest it and get a good quality crop? So the 1 rating is no, everything bolts before I can harvest it. It's basically, you know, not a harvestable crop. To 5, there's no bolting. I have a flexible harvest window. And then the intermediate scores are between those 2 things. You can advance to the next slide, please. For winter hardiness, again, cold is relative given your climate, generally involving frost, and probably a harder frost. So basically, when it gets what you identify as cold, like winter time, a range from plants don't survive, there's nothing to harvest, to plants look good after maybe repeated frost events or cold temperatures. If this doesn't apply to you, if you're not harvesting over winter, if you harvest everything before it gets cold, just leave this blank. That's totally fine. The other thing to the question about cold is that because we know your location and your hardiness zone, we can sort that out when we're looking at data. So we can see if cold ratings in one region are different than those in another. Just to reinforce that we're give you three different measures. There's yield, for how does this yield on the whole compared to other varieties that you grow on your farm of any crop. Then marketable yield, which is a percentage of how much of that total yield is able to be marketed. And then marketability is this fine difference, like how easily could you sell this? Which gets to not only, it's not about how much there is to sell, but is the quality of this variety and the type something that would work in your market. Oh, next slide, please. Shoot, I'm sorry, I was advancing on mine and not yours.
Can I make a quick comment, Solveig?
Please do, yeah.
Hardiness, just for people who haven't grown Radicchio through cold hardiness, they can look awful in the field sometimes, and they're still okay. I've had workers harvest Radicchio and send to a chef, and the chef sent it back saying these are all ruined, and we just had to peel away the disgusting slimy layer around the outside. So just make a point of not just looking at them in the field, but dig into them, because sometimes they look done and they're not. Yeah.
Cool, thank you for that. And yeah, if you want to advance to my next slide, all my talking about yield will make more sense. Those are the three categories. You have the yield, marketable yield, and marketability. So advance one more, please. And then the last traits that I'll mention are appearance and flavor. For the appearance, this gets directly to what David was just saying. It's appearance when it's ready for market. So yeah, in the field, things can look pretty rotten. But if the thing that you send to market is, that's the thing to evaluate. And then flavor, for this purpose, just like Helen was saying, it's a general, how much do you like this? How much do you want to eat it again? We're asking for a Radicchio that you try things raw, just for sake of uniformity. But we are both interested in answering some questions about flavor on both of these crops in more in-depth ways. There are a few ways we could do it. We could, for both Radicchio and rutabaga, one is to develop a flavor lexicon. So I worked with beets for my doctoral work, and I worked with some chefs to basically brainstorm words that they associated with the flavor, texture, and aroma of like 8 different varieties. And then we kind of sorted those out and came up with some kind of flavor groups that were useful for describing flavors of different varieties. So that's one option for either crop. We could look at variety and preparation, since like when I was tasting these when I was tasting the rutabagas, I found that some were like really delicious raw, but I thought a little bit lackluster cooked, and some that were extremely strong to eat raw, but that became delicious to me when they were cooked. So there are things we can do with both raw and cooked and different cooked preparations. Again, like Helen said, either in a like per household, individual household setting where we aggregate data on an online platform, or setting something up for different group tasting settings if we're able to do that with the COVID situation. So that's all up for discussion. Well, either now or later. The next thing we'll move into is the SeedLinked demonstration, but we can take Radicchio questions or flavor evaluation questions now, if that's interesting. All right. Okay, so at this point, so I was going to do the SeedLinked demo. So I think at this point, I probably have to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to share this. Okay, can you see that? Are those thumbs up? I'm trying to expand by window, but maybe that's just not going to work. Okay, so this is my login screen for my personal account. This is the display you'll see when you log in. This is the Explorer tab. Oh, you know what? I was going to, we'll do this first, then I'll say a little bit more about SeedLinked. This is part of SeedLinked's new interface. The Explorer tab is new this year, and what it does is helps you explore not only your own ratings and those of the CANOVI group, but those of everybody in mostly North America who's evaluated these varieties, to hopefully gain some more information about them. I'll show you the track tab first, because that's where we're going to track information for these trials. So you'll go into this layout. If you have trial invitations waiting, so if you haven't accepted the trial from your email yet, it will show up here in trial invitations. If you have accepted it, it will show up just like this. And I'm going to click on this demo trial. So the first thing it does is give me an option to enter dates. For this one, I've already entered my planting dates and transplanting dates. So we'll go to Delucia, and okay, so I entered a date of just before the summer solstice for seeding in the greenhouse. We'll save that. And then I'll go in and review them. You can enter dates at any time. You can enter them. Oh, and you also have the option to, once you enter one for something, choose the apply to all varieties. So you don't have to do it 4 different times. When you log into this screen, it will indicate based on the dates you gave it. So for Fenice, I said that I planted it, I sowed it, and I transplanted it. So it shows that. For Delucia, I just said that I seeded it. So it shows me that. And then down here is where you go to rate the different attributes. So I'll say that it's a month after transplanting. I'm going to go to the field and look at early vigor for Delucia. So I'll say rate. And it looks really good. So I'll give it 4 stars and save that. And I have a 4-star rating. We're only asking you to evaluate every trait once per season. If you want to, though, like say you come back after another month and Delucia is clearly the most vigorous variety in the plot, and you want to communicate that, you are able to enter a new rating. So you can enter a 5. If you do that, it's really helpful if you write us a note. So say 60 days after transplant, you can spell however you want. Best of the bunch. Save that, and then the total score changes to an average of the 2 that you put in there. Again, you don't need to do that, but that's what happens if you want to rate multiple times. You can also upload photos. This might be easier from the mobile platform that Chris will demonstrate, but if you have them on your computer, you can do that. You can enter comments on the overall variety. And if something's a total crop failure, nothing there to rate for whatever reason, you can mark it as failed, but then you will have no more capacity to rate that variety for the season. When you're done with all those ratings, you can go to complete your review, and you get some overall questions on each of the varieties. Would you grow this again? Yes or no? Any comments? And then I guess your overall feeling about that variety. So it's not just yes or no, it's yes, no, or neutral. And you can, if you continue, it asks you some questions about your overall, the overall trial site. So how you managed it, what kind of, whether you fertilized it, whether you applied any pesticides, general soil quality, anything out of the ordinary about your climatic conditions that season, and then you will complete the trial. I won't do that for right now, but that's a general walkthrough. You'll also see that SeedLinked has your location entered, which is interesting because I'm not there. Never mind, I'll have to think about that. Okay, let's just take a quick tour of the Explorer tab. Say that, so the Explorer tab lets you see what other growers have observed about varieties, and also work at sourcing those varieties. So say I go to Joe and rutabaga, I can see ratings from 17 reviewers, and some average ratings for a few traits. I can see some comments, and I can also see a couple of places to get that seed. And you know, perhaps interestingly, you can compare prices between companies. That could be a benefit. And then down here, you can see where the reviewers are, who evaluated it. There are quite a few Canadian growers in here. So this is, I guess this is the feature of the Explorer, the functionality of the Explorer tab. You also have the choice to compare varieties. So I guess I loaded that up last night. I'll show you that view. So I can compare Joan and Alta Sweet. And I can choose which. I can choose to compare yield. And anyway, you can play around with that. It's a little bit like the Tableau interface, except using all growers who have evaluated something, and choosing just the varieties you're interested in. So with that, Chris, would you like to screen share and show the mobile version?
Indeed. I'll get this going here. So I am a big fan of the mobile version. because I don't like to do things twice. And I know a lot of you still like to use pencil and paper to do your ratings, which is totally great. And then you can transfer your stuff to SeedLinked later. The nice thing about the mobile version is you can do your evaluations right in the field. So I'll skip over some of the stuff. The format actually mobile-wise is very similar to the desktop version, but it's actually quite simplified. So you get to your ratings quite quick. So I don't have any trial invites. When I go to my plantings, I've got my demo trial here, and you can see right away my varieties are there, and I can start rating. Now, what you're rating for is up on the top here, and you can just slide through these left and right. And you can also just slide through these left and right to move between those as well. So this is just going to be a swipe of your thumb in terms of navigating in that regard. Now there's two, I had three in my mind earlier, but the third one's escaping me. There's two really great advantages to using your mobile, the mobile version to do your evaluation in the field. The first one, which I mentioned, is that you're doing the evaluation and it's done. You don't need to write it down and then transfer it into SeedLinked later. And the second one is you can take a photo with your mobile phone and tie it right to the variety as well. So I'll show you that in a second. So you can see I've put in some ratings here for these crops. If I drop down here with the drop down menu is where I can put in my comments like Solveig showed you earlier. And same thing, I can change my ratings if I want. I'm missing a little bit of the bottom of my screen here, 1 sec. This is in the way. Okay, there we go. So as I change my rating, you can see the average there changes as well. Now what SeedLinked does, it also records each of these ratings. So you could see over time, these were done on the same date, but it'll always put your newest rating up at the top. And that way you might see as the season goes on, a rating for a particular trait gets better or a rating for a particular trait gets worse. And if you happen to enter the wrong thing, you can go in and edit that rating, or you can go in and delete it fairly easily as well. So I won't do that. And same thing, you can put your notes in here. So this might be where you record yield. Now, we found the comments and notes people have used in the trials to be very, very valuable. But I notice I make notes like lovely purple top or nice shape to the leaves. And I realized, boy, those things would make really nice pictures. And I do a lot of documentation with photos because I just find it so easy and so convenient. Now I can't totally do it on here because I'm actually working on my desktop. But once you've got your variety here, you can click on the 3 dots here, go to image. And there's one I took earlier testing things out. So just like the desktop version, you can choose from the gallery or take a photo. And if we take a photo, I think I'm going to end up sideways here because of the program. But what it does is it allows you to take the photo and then it's tied directly to that variety. So there's no sorting, there's no putting it into folders, anything like that. So a little bit of a delay there. So I won't go into that because I can't actually do it. So I found that really useful. And I think I'm just going to take a look in my other trial. I might actually have some photos in there. So I just found that very useful overall because I end up with this collection of photos that I can go back. Let's see here if we've got something in. Don't think I have them in this version, so I don't. But yeah, so those you can go through and take a look at those photos. And I did things like taking photos of the leaves, taking photos of disease pressure, taking photos of clubroot, just to get a real sense. If I see a rating of 1 or 2 for disease, and then I see these photos of clubroot or something like that, it really ties those 2 things together. So I found that really, really valuable. Now, a nice upgrade to SeedLinked has been that you can actually now work with SeedLinked offline in the field, do all your ratings, and then when you go back into your Wi-Fi area, it'll upload automatically. And this is a real game changer because a lot of you are not going to have Wi-Fi in the middle of the field, which is a reasonable thing still. So it allows you to do that evaluation and then sync that data later. And this was a bit of a challenge for people before when that wasn't an option and you had to be live. So with the syncing ability, with the ability to take a photo with the app, and then just the simplicity, like right away, I'm into here and doing my ratings without having to navigate too much. The mobile app does a really good job of making the evaluation very quick. Another thing I'll add is, I don't seem to have any power in my computer. People are reluctant to have their phones in the field because, you know, you're in the field. There's soil, there's water, there's all sorts of things. So the nice thing about this is generally you're touching your phone very few times. And I find when I go to do my comments, I actually use the speech to text feature. So I don't type in my comments. I basically just use speech to text. And that has really improved over the past couple of years. So I find generally it's very accurate, and every once in a while I have to transcribe some of my speech to text because you know, it'll say something like really nice green greaves or something like that, and I can usually tell what the word is it's replacing. So if you haven't used that feature, it's a good way to keep you from having to touch your phone too many times while you're in the field. So yeah, that is the mobile app. So hopefully some of you get a chance to play with that. SeedLinked has done an amazing job of adapting that and improving it with these new versions. So I think people will have a lot of success with that in the field.
Cool. And then I'll just say lastly about SeedLinked. Using this tool for the last couple of seasons has helped data sharing be a lot smoother and data collection be a lot faster, and allow us to turn around results to you like basically as soon as the trial closes in the fall or in the late season. So there are real benefits. With this new upgrade, they're also going to send out a new terms of use and privacy policy, which you should all get by email. I think I just at least got emails this morning and rolling out the new version. So you might find those and you can go explore it for yourself. When they finalize the terms of use and privacy policy, we'll hold another informational webinar with Nico, who's their co-founder and CEO, just to make sure make sure we're being totally transparent and clear about how data is being used. We can assure you at this point that your contact information isn't shared with anybody. You won't get on email lists from companies or anything like that. You will get emails directly from SeedLinked and from us, that's all. The information you enter about varieties will be, the only people who will see that connected to your personal information are us as researchers. In terms of what you see on the Explorer tab of the SeedLinked platform, those are trial ratings, but they're not linked to your identity. And questions are welcome about that, especially when we have our separate event with Nico, because obviously data sharing and privacy is kind of an ever-expanding topic in this world we live in right now. And we want to make sure we give those questions space. But yeah, questions or discussion on anything is welcome.
I guess, while we wait to see if any questions come in the chat, maybe I'll go over some of the ones that have come up to date. And so one thing that's been noted by Eric is just how long the days to maturity of some of the Radicchio sets are. So we're counting days to maturity as the number of days required for the plant to mature after you transplant it. So if you're thinking you're transplanting something out in July, some of the varieties take another 145 days according to the seed catalogs that provided them. You know, this is very much a crop that's adapted to a Mediterranean climate, where like in Italy, where it was developed, or the general Mediterranean basin, where the climate is such that plants can keep growing through the winter, where temperatures are cool, but generally not so cold as to stop growth completely or to destroy the plants. So yeah, it is very important to note that, like, if you did choose a set without necessarily thinking out like how long that takes, like maybe, you know, you can reconsider it if you think that some of the sets are really not adapted to your climate. The short season sets like can do very well outside of the coastal climates of British Columbia. And we decided to make all the sets available to everyone because these long DTM sets can potentially be interesting if you have a tunnel, if you have a greenhouse, if you're experimenting with season extension in any way, or if you're experimenting with just really overwintering them and letting them grow back in the spring. There was just so much like interesting diversity, colors, shapes. We just wanted to give everyone the chance to try them and play around with growing them and fitting them into your systems, which we know can be very complex and extremely varied from farm to farm. So yeah, no pressure to do it if you just don't think it fits into your farm, but that's why they all are available. It's as an experimental opportunity. And yeah, we'll be really curious. Like, I'd love to know like how it goes if you tried one of these long days to maturity sets in a colder climate, how you did that, how it worked out. I'm just looking for any, yeah, so also like as Eric points out, like, you know, row covers, like there are some fairly low tech ways to extend your season quite a bit and protect the crops. Is there any, like just on a technical note, like we will share the PowerPoint from this presentation afterwards. I think we'll send it to you by email and we'll put it on the Seed Security website, or like that's the BATA initiative website. And we do have a recording. There's a slight technical glitch at the beginning, but we do have a recording of the entire content. We're just missing like a slight part of the intro. Apologies for that, but we will like write out an intro or record one and make the recording available as well afterwards for people who weren't here, or if there's any part that you want to revisit.
As I said, two quick things. One is that I'm not sure if we mentioned that we also have made paper or printable data collection sheets, and those are available on the Bought Initiative CANOVI website in case that's easiest to record things with paper and pencil in the field, and then use the desktop interface to transfer to SeedLinked. And then I'm also, Karen, I saw your comment in the chat about the garlic tasting, and I would love to hear about that now or another time.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about it. Just quickly, we just it was a real experimental thing in January a year and a half ago, and we just developed a sheet and had people taste it. We tasted it raw, we tasted it with pasta and oil, and we tasted it in a dip, and they were all different degrees of success. And then we provided apple to cleanse people's palate in between. But there are lots of I think there's some guidance online in terms of how to do tastings. But just to what you said about some of the rutabaga varieties being good raw, some being good cooked, that it's good to, I think, do both.
Totally.
So
thank you for, go ahead.
Happy to talk offline.
Lovely. Yes, that would be great. Yes, thank you.
And so we work with a community kitchen, which is right close to our farm. And so it's ideal to do. But obviously, due to COVID, we weren't able to do it this past winter. But
Sure.
But yeah, would love to host something, and I'm sure the community kitchen would work with us.
Cool. Yeah, I'll just put out there that at the University of Wisconsin, there's a Seed to Kitchen collaborative, which my beet tastings were a part of. And during COVID, they were doing potato and winter squash tastings, where people who participated got basically a muffin tin with a different variety in each cup, with a little parchment cup, and instructions to bake them for 20 minutes. And then they actually use, SeedLinked has a tasting interface that's different than the one that we're using for the field crop evaluations, and we recorded data on there. So that's another option if we decide that an at-home tasting is better for either convenience or COVID safety sake.
For sure. And one of the towns within Caledon was originally settled by a lot of Italian people. We've got a great Italian grocery store. So we could bring in that element too.
That's awesome. Yeah, to have chefs' input on what would be interesting to do with these things would be super great, especially for Radicchio, obviously with the Italian connection. I see a question from Eric in the chat. Curious to know how many growers would use drip irrigation as opposed to larger scale producers who maybe would not. Anybody want to comment on what kind of irrigation system you're using? Eric, are you thinking, yeah, Xavier says drip. Are you thinking for Radicchio or rutabaga or both?
Hi, I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think probably I was mostly thinking for rutabaga. If somebody has a large field and wants to grow a certain variety of rutabaga, then drip irrigation might not be practical for somebody like that.
That is the truth.
And then you just go with whatever the weather is on any given years, whereas a small scale grower would find strategies for watering just to be on the safe side.
Right, absolutely. I don't remember. I'm going to go back to the SeedLinked, like the part where they ask about your farm practices and see if they ask about irrigation. They do. So for irrigation, they ask full irrigation, limited irrigation, or dry land. So then we would at least have an indication of whether you're irrigating at all.
Okay, that's really interesting for me. Not that I'm a large scale grower, but it's very interesting to know the potential for large field growing of these crops.
Right. Yeah, it would really depend on your climate. Like when I farmed for almost a decade after graduating, didn't irrigate anything in Iowa, and a lot of years that worked fine because we got pretty regular summer rains, and some years it was a real problem. So in some places that can be a decent strategy. Dryland could work.
So that difference will show up on the end of the trials. We would know who's okay. Great.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
A few other people have chimed in and also seem to be using drip irrigation in the chat. And Chris has also posted a reminder and a link to the CANOVI Facebook group, which we invite you all to look up and join. And it's really a way for those who are social media inclined to be able to interact with each other kind of outside of these meetings we put together, and also just to share photos, ask questions. We're trying to monitor it regularly. Solveig has been posting a lot lately about some of the
carrot. A lot of carrot content, yeah. But that's also a great way if anybody's dealing with disease identification. like whether something is or isn't one of the diseases on rutabaga that we're talking about, etc. That's a great way to get input from other growers pretty quick. Cool. Well, should we round it up?
Sounds like a plan. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. It's really great. Like, it's really great to have you in person and be able to talk and get feedback, and really encourage you to get in touch with us whichever way you can or want to during the season. And
yes, for sure. I love the faces appearing. This is great. See who's out there.
It's like magic.
Right.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Good. Yeah. Great to see you all. And yeah, let's be in touch. Both Helen's and my emails are on the protocols, and of course your regional coordinators. We're looking forward to being a part of this with you.
Absolutely.
All right. All the best. See you soon.